Hey, it's Joey, the inventor of Pastor with No Answers, and probably the main host. I'm the lead host. You got lead pastors. I'm the lead host. I have campus podcasters. But I'm a dude. I have a dude's body. Sorry about that. Sorry I'm talking right now. But you get to hear from, I'll call her a friend now. I think we're friends. You get to hear about how there's some people who don't want sex from anybody. Sex of any kind. Get that junk, no pun intended, away from me. You're listening to a Women's Body Month on Pastor with No Answers. Rachel, I want to say up front that through the course of this conversation, I think you know my heart by now that my intentions are good, but I very likely will word something in a way that seems insensitive or ignorant. But I was going through my notes and I was like, oh gosh, I don't know if I should ask it that way. And
it's funny, like I said that I was an Enneagram 7 and we're the only Enneagram that's not connected to a heart type. So I just don't get my feelings hurt as much. Like I can be in my feelings, but I am like a very even person.
Okay.
And it's not going to hurt my feelings, I promise.
Cool. It was surprising for me last night. You and I were texting back and forth. And for a second, I was like, oh, shoot, was I insensitive? But I had brought up that Amy was coming on. And then I made a joke about how I'm bringing on someone who really likes sex. I don't know if you want to call it apprehension or just reservation, but how you explained it to me was extremely eye-opening. And I felt like the education process started. And there's so much more that I want to learn. I think you said that there's 3 types and what type you are and why you're a little more reserved with all of this.
So what I think is like really funny is like when you hear of asexuality, number one, it was really hard for me to find the label asexuality because you hear of asexuality in the terms of like, oh, this person is forever alone, you know, and like that was never true for me. I've always enjoyed being romantic or like being pursued, having feelings for somebody. Like that was always a side of life that I really enjoyed. But when I started understanding what asexuality is, it was like, oh, you're just like not sexually attracted to somebody. So somebody can enjoy sex and still be asexual. And I find that really, really interesting. So I thought like that tandem there that like we were talking about asexuality and you said that you're going to bring on somebody that liked sex. I'm like, well, they can still be asexual, but that's another caveat. But
that's interesting.
When you break it down, it's like, who are you sexually attracted to? But there are the 3 terms, sex favorable, sex neutral. I believe this is the center one. And then what I am is sex repulsed, just because like through whatever reasons, I don't know if it's because I don't like being touched. Like in my family, like we never really touched a lot. I don't desire that from partners. Thinking about, and this is kind of getting more like, this has nothing to do with asexuality, but like thinking about like kissing somebody is just like really difficult for me because I'm like, oh my God, this spit, like that is not attractive to me. And
this is so intriguing. You said that you enjoyed, I don't know if you use the word attraction, but you know, just how that makes you feel. Let's say you're 17 years old, you see a boy that's taken interest in you and you're like, wow, that's really awesome. Well, let's say a week later, he sits really close to you. And does that make you feel good if he asks you out and then reaches out for your hand? Like it seems like some of that romantic stuff, you're like thumbs up, but then anything that involves the actual physical bodies exchanging fluids in any way.
That's the way to put it, right? And this is why, like, when I told my best friend from high school that, you know, I thought I was asexual, like later on in life, I came to this terms and she was like, no shit. Where have you been? Because I think you know this about me. I was not raised Christian. I became a Christian when I was 20, have deconverted since then. But I was a stone cold atheist in high school and I had a purity ring. And I feel like I should have known then, like that maybe that was like a sign. I just don't want to like have sex. Like when I thought about relationships, it was more like the energy, the feeling that you get inside and like the butterflies in your stomach and like the nervousness and, you know, getting close to somebody. But it was never like, oh, I want to make out with you in a movie theater. And those were like the parts that I really had to get through. I mean, you go to like a museum and you find this like painting absolutely stunning. That doesn't mean you're sexually attracted to the painting. I think that people are beautiful, aesthetically very attractive, but that doesn't mean I want to like have sex with them. Or if I find them romantically interesting, that I want to see their private parts. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm like, maybe just keep that to yourself. You know?
Well, I'll say this: you'd be a hero in the youth groups I was growing up in. Even if you didn't believe in God, they'd be like, "You're saving yourself for marriage. You're going to heaven somehow. God bless you, young lady." I just want to say to you, listener, thank you. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Pastor with No Answers, to many people, provides a place where people can listen to real questions they ask themselves and real discussion to follow. I get people writing me all the time telling me that this is their Christian safe space, for lack of better words. Some call it their church, for crying out loud. Anyway, if you'd like to support this podcast and some of the things that go along with it by being a patron, it directly impacts what we do as a podcast family and as an online community. And you get some extra stuff. So if you'd like to consider being a patron, there's a link in the show notes and there's an email address if you'd like to set up a time to ask more questions with yours truly, motherfucker. And I actually didn't say the cuss word just now. I said motherfudger. I just put the bleep sound in there to make you think otherwise, just to be silly. Will you lead this youth group, please? Amy, what are you thinking with what you've already heard, and how educated do you think you are coming into this? Because I've got what I find funny story that's my only reference point, and it's, Amy, you would remember this guy. Do you remember Montel Williams? So it was a talk show back in the early 90s, and I just couldn't believe it. You know how you remember things as a youngster, seeing something on TV and it just left an imprint on your mind. Well, here you have Montel Williams introducing a person named Toby, and Toby is sitting up there with Montel Williams, and you're literally like, whoa, what's up with Toby? I can't really figure this out. And sure enough, Toby's an asexual, but it seemed to be biologically no testosterone, no estrogen. And so until I got older, I thought it was kind of almost like a genital neutral, like just don't have anything. But that's like my only reference point, other than, I mean, I know some adults that don't like sex, so I guess they would fall into that. Amy, what are your thoughts?
The past year probably have really been engaging more with understanding like the LGBTQ community. And I feel like I knew a lot of gay people, but that I didn't know very many trans people at all. And that I just didn't understand how to even trans, like I couldn't wrap my mind around it. Like I couldn't understand. And so I spent a lot of time talking to a really good friend of mine who explained a lot of stuff. And she was like, I'm gay and I don't even understand. So she went all out to Charleston Pride and did like every event they had to learn. And then she just kind of like was telling me all kinds of stuff and helping me understand. And I just think it's healthy to understand everybody's point of view. It's hard to understand something that is like so foreign to you. And I guess, you know how they have like the whole 5 love languages. And one of mine is physical touch, but I mean, I'm kind of like a brat, like a lot of them. I score high. So I'm like telling my husband, like, sorry, high maintenance, even knew that going in. I'm also like, I would never drink after my husband. Same thing, like the whole spit thing makes me want to throw up. But like, I'd love a good makeout session. So it's like, I'm like, oh God, now I'm going to be thinking about spit whenever we can.
The gay people in my life, trans people, I don't know as many, but I was talking to my therapist. She's got so much experience. She actually told me trans people are by far the most traumatized people as a consistent whole that she ever encounters, ever. And so she was telling me that a trans child, there's never a point in life where they don't know something's up. It's not like a light bulb and they're like, oh, wait, something's the matter. Or something doesn't feel right. Like it's always there. It just over time, it establishes into logic and what's really going on. Hear the same thing from my gay friends. It's like once they start hitting puberty, they start realizing stuff. With asexuality, did you experience the same sort of thing? Your friends are getting all boy crazy and kissing boys for the first time and talking about it during sleepovers. Were you just reserved and, yeah, I don't really feel this way? Were you embarrassed?
What's really funny is one of my best friends in high school is Christian, and she didn't date anybody either. Well, I dated, But it was always like for 1 month. And when things got too serious, I like jetted really quick. I was not picky about my friends, but I feel like friendships in high school are very like fractured. I don't know. Like, I feel like they're just like holding it together. And I work with high schoolers and I have for many years. So I can say this like with confidence. A lot of friendships are for a season. So like, I feel like I would be like really close with friends. I never like really had like a big friend group just like for that reason. But my one friend that did stick around that I connected the closest with, she is still one of my closest friends to this day. Part of me coming out to her was hoping that she would also realize that she was asexual. And I was just explaining it to her and sitting down. I was like, the only model of asexuality I had in my life growing up was the lead singer of the Smiths, Morrissey. And nobody knows his sexuality, but a lot of people suspect he's asexual, but he also has never dated. I grew up loving the Smiths, loving Morrissey. That was my model of asexuality. So like that could never be me because I dated.
Were these guys ambitious to have more physical contact with what you were wanting?
I don't think that I ever let them get close enough to me because like I would kiss them, like it would be like hard for me. And there are some like times where like, that was just kind of like the nature of things and you come to expect it and it becomes like kind of a numb thing. It's never something that I necessarily desired, but I think when it got like more involved, like that's when I just started like pulling back and like eventually the relationship would end. And so I think it was just like, I got really freaked out and it was really hard for me. But when I became more of an adult and that like was just part of relationships, like when you're in your late teens, early 20s, I moved out when I was 18, that became like more of an expectation. And I remember, and this is like so fucked up, just like thinking back to like what I used to do before I like came out. I had a boyfriend when I was 21 and he said that he loved it when I would drink because I would be more open to having sex. And so his goal was like to try and get me to drink a lot. And like in hindsight, that's horrible. But like at the time I was like, oh, that makes me desired. That makes my boyfriend want to be with me. And so like I wanted to drink so that I could be like loosey goosey or whatever for him. So I could like mentally like be okay with it. That sounds so fucked up, right? The things that I had to go through to like mentally prepare myself to like be in the bedroom. When I understood asexuality, it like all just like clicked in that moment. And I remember like bawling my eyes out being like, no, I'm not broken. Like there's nothing wrong with me. It's hard because you want to be involved in the sexual part of society. It's always so hard for me to like mentally be there and like connect with somebody through that. It almost like makes me feel further from that person when I end up being intimate with them. Back to like the high school stuff. It was isolating, but it's not even like I was divinely protected through who my best friend was, but like the fact that like my best friend also came out as asexual around the same time that I did, that was almost like in the universe's weird way of like protecting me through high school, of like having somebody who we could understand when we didn't even know what was going on. And now we're like two adults. We're both 30. She's dated one person in the 16 years that I've known her. And here I am married, so it's just like, it's really cool to see her expression of asexuality, because that's just like a non-negotiable. She does not want kids. Like she would rather be alone than ever be intimate with somebody. I came out after I was married to Derek. And so a lot of people are like, oh, well, you have kids. Well, naturally, if you want kids, you have to have sex. And so like, for me, it was a very like functional purpose. And like, so poor Derek, like loved it when we were trying for kids, It's been really interesting talking about like, yep, you do have to have sex to have kids.
Right.
And I have had sex before as an asexual.
How you guys are walking this through, I have no idea what your setup is, but you just said that Derek enjoyed those times. And if you are never desiring sex, do you have times when you functionally give to your husband because you love him? Is sex just off the table? Do you have an open marriage? I have no idea.
Like genuinely, we've tried it all. I don't know if I have his permission to share this.
Sure. We can.
If I'll say it, and if we need to fix that, we can. We actually have tried an open marriage, and that honestly, because I still like love him, am in love with him and he's still my partner. He's still my husband. I never considered myself polyamorous. It was absolute torture to explore that. And we tried. I was in therapy. He was in therapy. And it just ended up being a very, very challenging thing. And it ended up just not working for us at that time. I'm not sure if it's something that I would be able to open up in the future, because I think through that process, Derek also understood that he needed like an emotional connection to be like sexually interested in somebody. And so like where we thought that it would be like a very friends with benefits thing for him, which, you know, like I'm very pro woman, like I would never, ever, ever want to demonize a woman that we have agreed to an open relationship with. And so for me, like it's just as much about protecting a woman as it is protecting myself. And like if I ever thought bad thoughts about a woman or like were jealous, like I felt bad, like I felt dirty because like she was just doing what we had all agreed on. And I was the one who like needed to check myself, because in no way, shape or form would that ever be like her fault. And so it was really challenging. There have been times it's been easier for me where it's been more neutral, like not very often.
And let me clarify. So you're saying more neutral as opposed to
Adverse.
Repulsive.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
gotcha. But you're saying sometimes ideally it's not a turn off, but you're not necessarily turned on.
Right. And it can be like, yeah, like I'll totally, he was like, babe, do you mind just like doing something? And I'll totally give you a favor in return. And like, that's the point that we're at. It's just like, it's such I won't say like we can be like necessarily completely open about it, because I think there's a lot of guilt on my part and a lot of like missing that on his part. And so I think when we talk about it, like we both just feel really stuck. Like there is just no good solution unless that asexual is sex neutral or sex favorable. But even then it's like, you know, like Derek wants to be desired sexually. Like that's just a very natural thing that people want. And that is not something that I have been able to give him, because that's just, and it doesn't matter who it is. And I've tried to explain it. Like I've never like wanted to, when I see somebody, sleep with them or wondered what it would be like to hook up with them. Like that is just never, that is such a foreign thing to me.
Like never, not one time.
Because like to me, when I see somebody who's attractive, I'm like, I could totally go get some wine with you, you know, and that's immediately where my brain goes. When I was in high school, it would be like, I just want to hear that you have feelings for me. That's my goal. Like that would be like the ultimate thing. I think in hindsight, so much makes sense. But when you're trying to figure out that label, like you almost feel like an imposter when like you have had sex and you have had intimate relationships, because it's like, well, that doesn't make sense.
But those relationships that you've had that have been intimate, I feel like they sound like they're extremely traumatic.
Literally torture.
Like, are you like just bawling your eyes out? Like, when is this over? When is this over? Like, I feel like it sounds terrible.
Yeah, I think there were some relationships that I was more comfortable with because I felt more in control. And then some relationships where, as I said earlier, like I basically had to drink, because like I know that if I wasn't intimate with this person in a sexual way, that he would leave me, because he was a 20-year-old boy, you know what I'm saying? And I was so in love with him. So yeah, it was a lot of like through the years feeling like I had to sacrifice a lot of my comfort. And so in my marriage, like that has been like a point of conversation a lot with Derek and I. In these past relationships, I would be more sexual, but like in my marriage, that is something where I feel like I have the freedom and the autonomy to say no and still like have the respect and support of my husband, where like in past relationships, it would have almost been like a breakup fight. You know what I'm saying? So to feel safe enough to like say no just shows how incredible my husband is. To not only when I came out, he was like immediately supportive, but he went as far as to like buy me asexuality stickers and like get me a card. Like he was more than supportive, knowing that like asexuality will never change for me. It wasn't like, I'm just not into sex this year. You know, it's almost like a death of that type of intimacy in our marriage, like claiming that orientation over me. Like number one, he just saw the relief that I felt, because the reason that I started therapy back up as an adult was because we were having so much trouble. But through therapy and through the asexuality subreddit really, really helped me. And just like listening to podcasts, reading other people's experience with the label, like trying it on and like talking to people that I really trusted, like my sister, my best friend, stuff like that. It was just more confirmation that like that makes sense, you know, because I always thought like maybe I'm going to wake up one day and just be a lesbian, because there's no way I am sexually attracted to my husband. That's hard. Mm-hmm. But then like, by the way, you just aren't sexually attracted to anybody.
Talking to you is making me realize how many things I have in my head as innately connected to sexuality. In my head, I just have all that stuff connected to sex. And I'm curious, do you enjoy feeling attractive? And do you like it if someone says, wow, you really look pretty today? And that may sound like the dumbest question, but I have that stuff connected to sexuality.
I think it's really funny. And like, guys just don't message me. Guys don't comment on my stuff. Like Are
you serious?
100%. There was one person who would like send me emojis on like selfies in my Instagram. Well, number one, I like don't take a ton of selfies either. But like I would take like, you know, once every few months, I would like post a picture of myself in my stories. And there was like one person who would like send like a heart eye emoji that was a male. And like I would immediately show Derek, I'm like, this guy's fucking weird. Like, but actually it ended up turning out to be like a ton of Twitter drama around this guy being exposed for taking advantage of women. You know, it feels really, really good when women compliment me, because I think for so long I felt threatened by women. But in the last like 5 to 6 years, like I adore and I treasure women, because when you like wake up to how much the patriarchy has separated us, to not blame men, but blame women. If a guy cheats on a girl, you're going to get mad at the girl, not the guy. Or like he'll try. And that like, I remember feeling like very competitive with women, whether they were dressed nicer than me for whatever reason. Like it was just, it's ingrained in you as a woman. And so I think when I was an evangelical Christian, where I would get a lot of male attention, I was told very early on in like my Christian walk to not have private conversations with men. That weeded a lot of men out of my life. And like, then I got married, and then I've just like never had a good reason to really talk to men, just because like, it's not natural for me to have friendships with them anyway. I am just more of like a girl's girl. When women compliment me, it is like, I feel like amazing, because I am just such like a girl gang kind of person. And I want women to feel good about themselves. I don't know. We just like feel insecure or feel like for no reason. So for a woman to go out of their way to compliment me, it means so much, because it means like they understand like a sisterhood. I just hate jealousy among women. And so like, that is like my whole spiel on like, I will forever and always adore all women, and I will give them endless benefit of the doubts. It takes so much for me to like feel against a woman.
What if it's like a racist baby killing woman? Like,
I have my boundaries.
Did guys, when you were like dating, and if you weren't sleeping with them, were they mean and calling you a lesbian or belittling you or kind of badgering you?
I think I'm just very closed off to a lot of guys. There was nothing like really that blatant. Like I've been very fortunate where like I've not dated like the most respectful men, but I've also like have known when to cut and run. And I never put myself in like very unsafe situations to be treated that way. And like also I'm a very like dominant woman. I just am. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think a man ever would even fucking try. Like, like if you're with me, like I have this energy that like you're just around and find out.
Right. You said earlier that there's nothing wrong with you. And I was thinking along the lines of humanity is marked with sexuality, just like humanity is marked with the ability to see. If someone is blind, we take pity. And I don't think any of us would think along the lines of there's nothing wrong with that person. How would you compare that to something being blind, for instance? Mm-hmm. And is that an offensive comparison?
I think it's really interesting to like be asexual and know that like sex is a very like useful function in relationships, just as sight is to experiencing other sensations. Both of them are not necessary for survival. But I don't know if the relation to those two, I can't tell if they're insensitive or not. That's above my pay grade personally. When I asked you, like somebody who loves sex coming on the podcast, I just don't want pity, because I think every time I come out as, and I'm like, no, I'm asexual. Number one, I have to like basically define asexuality, because people are like, oh, you mean, you know, like you want to die alone, as I said earlier. So when you said that Amy was coming on the podcast, it was kind of like, oh, like I just don't want to, because I had never met her before, and now meeting her, I'm like, oh my God, she's so cool. But at the time, hearing that somebody who loves sex was coming on the podcast, it was like, I just don't want to be made like a spectacle of. You don't like, oh, I'm so sorry, like that sucks for you, you know, like it's just kind of like, oh, thanks, I've not heard that like 1,000 but it's like really funny because that happens. They're like, wait, so you like don't find anybody attractive, you don't like ever like want to have sex. And it's just like, it's really interesting when you tell somebody that you're asexual. It's just like the conclusions that they jump to and the immediate invalidation that they throw at you is like almost like laughable, you know, like you can't have kids if you're asexual. What are you talking about? You can never have had sex if you're asexual. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, okay. Genuinely, a lot of asexuals like love to masturbate. That is how they get their sexual expression out, because it's not with a partner, but they still like love the feeling of an orgasm. They just don't feel comfortable doing it with somebody.
Gotcha. That is very eye-opening. And before Amy jumps in, but there are asexuals who have zero interest in orgasm of any kind also?
I would say that's less likely than you would think.
Okay.
Yeah. Because most asexuals, including myself, really love solo sex. And so it's not that we don't want to orgasm. It's just that for me, doing it with somebody else feels almost like violating. It's not that it's like way too intimate. It's just like, that's for me and myself, you know? And again, I should have known this because like that, like as young as I can remember, like that was what I did. And I never just like wanted to be with a person. I never wanted to be intimate. But like somebody like Derek, who is heterosexual, like solo sex just doesn't cut it for him because half of that is intimacy. Like he wants that intimacy with somebody else. But like for me, that's just something that I just don't have a concept for. Because even if Derek and I do whatever in the bedroom and I like happen to orgasm, it, number one, is incredibly difficult for me to get there. And number two, it's just not enjoyable. You know what I'm saying? And so it's kind of interesting. The, like, when you say you're asexual, like you almost have to prepare yourself to have like a 30-minute explanation of like what that actually means, you know, because it is like, it's very misunderstood. A lot of people call it like the invisible sexuality. Even within like the LGBTQ plus community, like a lot of people would not consider us part of it, even though like obviously they're like, yeah, on the surface, like they're very accepting. Having no sexuality is very different from being able to very much express your sexuality for the first time. You know, it's hard.
So is sexuality technically always having to do with someone else? Because it seems like you would have a sexuality, it just doesn't involve someone else. Or I have no idea. I just thrown that out there. I don't know. I mean, if someone masturbates, it seems as if that is a part of their sexuality. And
I think that that's more like for the feeling.
Okay.
And because it's not an intimate time with myself. As much as I do love myself, I am not sexually in love with myself.
Right.
But I think that's really important because I think like a lot of asexuals are just seen as like prude individuals. And we're not. Like a lot of us just enjoy it in a very different way.
So again, not knowing a lot about transsexuals and not understanding, I'm like, okay, so there's a man and a woman in a relationship, but they identify as the opposite sex. And they're together. A man who's living his life as a woman, and there's a woman living her life as a man. I was like, do they have just like, that's like regular sex? They were like, well, not necessarily. And so they're like, you know, it can be that if you're transitioning, like you're not okay. If you're a female, like you're not okay with your breast, you're not okay with your vagina. And of course, not like for everybody, but just like some people. Yeah. And they would be like, I don't want to have sex and involve you being intimate with those parts of me because that's what you're disassociating with. And I was like, oh my God, like that makes so much sense. And so it's like, if you talk to someone like this and you sit down and you hear a perspective and you can start to understand it, I think it helps you to not be so, well, one, now I will never listen to someone who's saying they're asexual and be an idiot to be like, oh my God, you're missing out. Like that seems so, you know what I mean? Like that does sound like really shitty to say. And
Rachel had a really good impersonation of those people that say, oh my gosh, you don't like that? You almost went Valley Girl. It sounded like, oh my God, like you don't like doing that? My God.
The characters that I like think in my brain.
Yeah.
And have experienced.
It is really a dumb thing to say. Like, so I'm liking that I'm understanding this more. Like, what builds intimacy with you then? Like, not physical intimacy, but like, what are things that seem fulfilling to you in that way?
So there is like one way that Derek can say, I love you. That is just like, if we are in the middle of a fight, and it is like so stupid, but it is like, it like fills up my love tank and like sometimes like brings me to tears because he knows how much it means to me. It's bringing a cup of water to my bedside table every night just because it's so routine for him and he thinks about it. And even when we're like fighting, he'll still bring up that cup of water. And like I've told him and expressed to him, and everybody in my family knows like how important that cup of water is to me. You know, and it's so dumb, but they're like, that is my love language. Like that makes me feel so close to him. Like forgetting my lunch and him like driving it to me 15 minutes out of the way just because he cares. Mm-hmm. And I've never thought of having sex as a way to like fill up my emotional need. So for me, like coming home and having the bed made because that's important to me means so much that like it can take anything that I'm like mad at him about or anything that I'm carrying through the day and just like immediately like I feel so seen and understood and I feel loved. And I'm not a words of affirmation person, really. It's just a lot like acts of service, just like thinking about me. I just want to know that he's thinking about me. And that is, I guess, my intimacy. If I'm gone all day and there's one way that I can tell that he thought of me during the day, you know, means so much. And then when we're together, we have so many of these, but like we have the and cards, the couple edition, and then we have We're Not Really Strangers or whatever it's called. We have like so many of those like card games that will like just take on date nights and just like draw like a ton of cards and just like talk about our past, talk about our future, talk about things that we just like don't necessarily know about each other that we know that we're able to expand on. And that is like getting to know him and who he is, like apart from our fighting or apart from the grind of life. Like that is intimacy, him adoring me.
I love that. And I think it's honestly for couples who put so much emphasis on the sexual relationship and when it's not doing well can often look at the relationship as not doing well. Amy, I've got 3 quick questions. Did you want to jump in with anything?
Yeah. So like physicality is like, ugh, for you. Is it different? I hope y'all understand where I'm coming from when I say this, because obviously you're not sexual with your kids, but just the physical touch part. Is that weird, like with your kids? Do you like hug and hold their hand and stuff, or is that like, blech?
Yeah, so I think like with babies and with my 2-year-old son, it's so easy. It just feels like, you know, even when my 2-year-old is like kicking and screaming and like biting me, it's like, oh, you're like just so innocent and I love you. That it's just like, you just like want to like cuddle him up and like just kiss him on the cheek. And then my sister just had twin baby girls, and that's a whole different story for another time, but she went through IVF for 5 years and then finally got pregnant, identical twins. She got diagnosed with twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome, almost lost them, had to get multiple surgeries. Those babies should not be here. She almost, her water broke at 19 weeks. Like just in every way, those babies should not be here. So like you just cuddle them and they're just like the sweetest little innocent miracle babies, you know? But I think like with my 6-year-old, it's really changed. And that's hard to admit and hard to say, and makes me feel like a horrible mom that I can sit here and like cuddle my 2-year-old. But like with my 6-year-old, it's like my therapist has to challenge me to like touch him 10 times a day, because that is just such like not something I think of when they lose that like baby innocence. It's not even about innocence. My 2-year-old is, I don't want to say anything but innocent. He just doesn't know, you know, he doesn't know that like punching me hurts. he knows that punching gives me a reaction or gives him a reaction, but he doesn't know it hurts. He doesn't know the impact. I think when there's like the level of consciousness that comes into like a kid or an adult, it's just a lot harder for me to connect on them on a physical level. So like I've had to be intentional in grabbing Rain's hand, my older son, and holding his hand through Target, or like cuddling him and saying, I love you, because that's not something my parents ever did with me. And touch is very important. And that's something that just because I don't feel like I need it, I mean, sometimes I need a good hug, but usually that comes from like one of my best friends.
So for me, it's a big question for me. I don't know if I'd call it the $1 million question. And then my last two questions, you totally have the open door. Not that you need the open door, but I just want to make it easy for you to say, go to hell, Joey. That's a dumb question. Not even going to touch it, because they're classic Joey questions. They're not meant to be insulting or disrespectful, but they're a little bit out there. All right. So if you could take a magic wand and be all over Derek, enjoy sexual intimacy, would you push that button?
Yes, 100%. I have never loved being asexual. When I found out the label fits really well for me, it felt like a huge loss. It didn't feel like this, oh, I'm asexual and I get to tell the world, you know, it's like this is my life. This is the rest of my life, where I thought that I was like broken and had to go to therapy to heal some like sexual trauma to be able to be intimate. No, like this is just who I am fundamentally. You know, there might be some trauma mixed in there, which that term is catosexuality, to be asexual based off of sexual trauma. You know, I can remember when I was like 6 years old and my dad would like put his hand on my leg in like an endearing way. And I would just like have such a hard time being touched. Like, this is just, you know, Derek and I have talked about, maybe it's sensory, maybe it's just like, I don't know. But at the end of the day, this is what it is. For whatever reason, we can call it sensory. We can call it this, we can call it that. But the expression that it comes out is an asexuality. And it is incredibly isolating. It feels like I can't please my husband in the way that he needs. It is human need to connect in the way that you are designed to connect. And I can't give that. Or if I give that, I'm literally bawling my eyes out, you know, like it just, and he would never ask that of me. And he has never asked that of me. And again, there are times where it's easier for me to like mentally prepare, but it is like it's a mental gymnastics for me. And the best way that I can put it is like, for people that are heterosexual, imagine being with somebody of your same sex, you know, like that's very hard to think of if that is not your orientation. For someone who is gay or lesbian, imagine being with somebody who is of the opposite sex than you. It is so hard, you know.
So that brought it home. That brought it home. So when you have sex, it would be on the same level of me having sex with a guy. That's how troublesome it would be. It
just feels very like unnatural, is the way that I can put it.
And you don't like people to say sorry, but as someone who cares about you, like I don't want to say sorry, but
like we're on this level where it's okay, because like I just don't want pity from people who just don't know or don't care to know. What I was saying, like a spectacle of me. Like I don't want a spectacle to be made. Like I am strong. This has been my reality. Like it's not new. But at the same time, like there are a lot of asexuals who feel very empowered in their asexuality, and there's a lot who don't want to be this way. And, you know, I think it's like, I understand how hard it is for people to come out and come to terms with their sexuality. And mine is just no sexuality. Some people are literally kicked out of their homes for coming to terms with who they are. And like, if the only thing that I feel is left out of like sex culture and, you know, like working it out with my husband, like how fortunate. And I don't mean to like bypass any emotions that I feel, because they're real, but like at the same time, like I just want to make space for how much worse it could be, and how brave people are who come out that are literally like disowned. Yeah, it's devastating. But at the end of the day, if I could experience some type of sexuality, I don't care if I'm lesbian, I don't care if I'm bisexual, I don't care if I'm straight, like just anything. Like it'd be so interesting to experience that human connection that people tell me is like divine, you know, without being like germs in the spit. What are we going to do with all of this like mess that you just made? Like this has got to go.
If you're not attracted to anyone sexually and would typically be repulsed, if someone said you have to have sex with someone tonight and there was a choice of 8 different men, let's say, would some of them be less repulsive than others? I know this scenario would never happen, but
I mean, it matters. I think tall, thin, and tattooed has always been like the most aesthetically pleasing to me, where like I get excited, which is so funny because like Derek is not, he's tall and he's strong. But he has one tattoo that I got him for a Christmas present. But also he thought he was going to be with like, you know, Christian girl with blonde hair and no tattoos. And you know, so we're living our best life. But it matters not that I'm sexually attracted to them. And I always tell Derek this, like, I would so much rather a one night stand because I'd rather just be like a one and done and go, because it doesn't have to be intimate. It's almost like where I don't have to like sit in the feelings of that after with that person. I'm not a one night stander. I've never really had one night stands. That's like my thought is like, there's no real intimacy involved in that. So it's just like a sexual act, which I don't like anyway, but at least it's not intimate and I'm not being expected to have this like magical moment between a partner. Like it can just be like stripped down to the act and piece the fuck out. People should always meet anybody in like who's exploring their sexuality with curiosity. If I had more safe spaces to explore like who I was, I would have not been miserable for this long. You know, like I could have found this when I was like 18 rather than 26. And how much more trauma I faced through putting myself in very uncomfortable scenarios because I thought I was broken. I think it's just like stay curious, you know, because a lot of people are afraid that like people are going to be questioning too much. And like poor trans people, like they're always a scapegoat. It seems like people are going to change their gender and then realize that they're not. If they are doing what is like most authentically them, there should be no fear. And I am very firm in that. I would rather somebody come out as lesbian and then later decide that they're bi and then later decide that, no, actually I'm straight, than like never give themselves that chance to explore. But how many women have come out as bisexual in their late 20s because they realized this part of themselves that they were never able to explore, you know? And it's because we weren't given the permission to be curious. And we were always shut down that we were like pretending. And even if we're pretending, it's okay. Even if we feel like an imposter, it's okay. That's part of learning who you are.
Awesome. Rachel, thank you so much. This was awesome.
You're very well spoken, and it's so intriguing to hear your story because you can tell like done a lot of hard work. I feel like to be able to be where you are. So thanks for being open to talking about it.
Well, I appreciate it. I really appreciate you both like making space for it, because I know like I get really intimidated to share because it can be exhausting to talk about something that like has like more than anything so much bias around it. Like because it's just, you have like a very clear picture of what asexuality is. Thank you guys for listening and staying curious. And
and
it was really nice to meet you, Amy.
Oh, you too.
Sorry, I was so afraid to talk to you.
No, it's okay.
And hey, I appreciate you trusting us with your story. That means a lot.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it.
Awesome.